Tom had been dreaming of owning his own home for years. He worked hard at his job, saved carefully, and imagined the day he could finally have a place to call his own. For months he had searched through listings, visited neighborhoods, and imagined himself walking through different houses. Nothing felt quite right until one sunny morning, he drove down Oak Street. There, on a quiet corner, stood a small, charming house with light blue siding and a bright white porch. The windows gleamed in the sunlight, and the front yard had a neat lawn with a few flowering bushes. The backyard was fenced and had plenty of space for a garden. It was everything Tom had hoped for. His heart raced as he stepped out of his car and walked up the path. Tom imagined sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun rise. He pictured planting flowers in the backyard, maybe even growing his own vegetables. For the first time in months, he felt at peace. He could see himself hosting small gatherings with friends, enjoying quiet evenings after work, and finally having a home that belonged just to him. As Tom admired the house, he noticed neighbors across the street talking to each other. Most of them waved as he looked around, and he smiled back. But one woman caught his attention. She had her arms crossed and a sharp look on her face. She was talking loudly to someone, and her tone seemed serious. Tom felt a little nervous but tried to ignore it. Maybe she was just having a normal conversation. Over the next few days, Tom spoke with the real estate agent and learned more about the house. It was affordable, well-maintained, and most importantly, it was not part of the neighborhood's homeowners association, or HOA. Tom didn't mind having rules in his own home, but he liked the idea of freedom. No extra fees, no strict regulations, no need to follow dozens of small rules. This house felt like a place where he could truly be himself. On the day Tom went to sign the papers, he drove to the office feeling excited and nervous. He could hardly believe this day had finally come. After completing the paperwork, he was officially the owner of the Oak Street house. Tom felt proud and happy. He imagined moving in the next week, unpacking his boxes, and finally starting the life he had always wanted. That evening, Tom decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. He wanted to familiarize himself with the streets and meet some of the neighbors. Most of the people were kind and waved as he passed. He smiled and waved back, feeling like he was already part of a friendly community. But across the street, the woman he had noticed before was watching him closely. Her eyes followed every move he made. Tom felt a little uneasy, but he tried to shake the feeling. Maybe she's just curious, he thought. Some people are like that when someone new moves in. As he walked back to his new house, Tom started planning what he would do first. He would clean the rooms, unpack his things, and maybe even start a small vegetable garden in the backyard. He imagined hosting a small welcome party for his friends and neighbors, sharing his happiness with the people around him. Little did Tom know, his peaceful new life was about to face an unexpected challenge. The sharp-eyed neighbor across the street, who seemed to disapprove of him, had already started planning how she would react to the newcomer. Tom's dream home had everything he wanted, but the quiet corner of Oak Street was about to become the center of an unusual and stressful situation. Tom had no idea that the woman would soon make it her mission to interfere with his happiness. She seemed determined, and her sharp gaze told him nothing good could come from ignoring her. But for now, Tom only thought about the house, the garden, and the calm life he had always wanted. He did not yet know that life on Oak Street would be far more complicated than he had ever imagined. The next morning, Tom woke up early with excitement. He could barely wait to move into his new house. After a quick breakfast, he drove to the Oak Street house to start unpacking. The sun was shining and the birds were singing. Everything seemed perfect. As Tom opened the front door, he felt a wave of happiness. This was finally his own space. He carried boxes inside, arranging them carefully in the rooms. He placed his favorite books on the shelves and set up the kitchen just the way he liked it. With every small task, the house felt more like home. Outside, the neighborhood was coming to life. Children were playing on the sidewalks, neighbors were tending to their gardens, and the gentle hum of morning chatter filled the air. Tom smiled. He felt like he had stepped into a friendly, calm world where life was simple and pleasant. But from across the street, the sharp-eyed neighbor, Mrs. Miller, was already watching. She had noticed Tom moving in and immediately frowned. In her opinion, new people should always ask permission, follow rules, and respect her idea of how things should be done. The fact that Tom's house was not part of the HOA annoyed her. She felt the quiet neighborhood she loved was suddenly at risk. Mrs. Miller marched across the street and stood near the edge of Tom's yard, pretending to admire her own garden. She watched him unpack and arrange his things, muttering under her breath. "Who does he think he is?" she said. "This isn't how things are supposed to be." Tom noticed her staring but tried to ignore it. Some people are just curious, he thought. He continued unpacking, humming softly to himself. He was determined not to let anyone ruin his first day in his new home. Later that afternoon, Tom decided to take a break and sit on the porch. He sipped his coffee and watched the sun slowly move across the sky. It was peaceful, exactly what he had imagined. He heard laughter from children playing nearby and felt content. Mrs. Miller, however, had other plans. She walked over, hands on her hips, and stopped right at the edge of Tom's property. "Hello," she said sharply. "I see you've moved in. But you know, this neighborhood has certain standards. You can't just do anything you like here." Tom stood up politely. "Good afternoon," he said calmly. "I'm happy to be here. I'll try to respect everyone and keep things nice. But my house is not part of the HOA, so I don't have those rules." Mrs. Miller's eyes widened and her frown grew deeper. "Not part of the HOA? That's unacceptable. You can't just live here without following our rules." She pointed at his yard as if to emphasize her point. Tom took a deep breath. "I understand your concern, but this house is legally mine. I want to be a good neighbor, and I promise to keep things clean and peaceful." Mrs. Miller shook her head and muttered something under her breath. "This is going to be a problem," she said. Then she turned and walked back to her own yard, clearly planning her next move. Despite the tension, Tom tried to stay positive. He returned to unpacking, determined not to let one neighbor ruin his excitement. He set up a small garden in the backyard, planting flowers along the fence. The work was tiring but satisfying, and he felt a strong sense of accomplishment. By evening, the sun was setting, painting the sky with warm shades of orange and pink. Tom stood on his porch looking around. His home was finally complete enough to enjoy, and he could hear the soft sounds of the neighborhood winding down. Children waved to him as they went inside, and a few neighbors smiled politely. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that Mrs. Miller was watching. He knew that life on Oak Street might not be as quiet and simple as he had imagined. But for now, he chose to focus on the good. He had his own home, a lovely backyard, and the freedom to live as he wanted. That was worth everything. As night fell, Tom went inside, locked the door, and smiled to himself. Tomorrow would be another day of settling in. And while Mrs. Miller might have plans of her own, Tom was determined to make his new house a happy home no matter what. The next morning, Tom woke up to the cheerful sound of birds singing outside his window. He stretched and smiled, thinking about all the things he wanted to do in his new home. Today, he decided, he would focus on finishing the garden and arranging the backyard. The flowers needed planting, and the small vegetable patch he had planned would take some work. As Tom stepped outside with his gardening tools, he noticed Mrs. Miller across the street, peering through her blinds. She had been watching him early in the morning and did not look happy. Tom waved politely, hoping to show that he was friendly. She quickly pulled the curtain back, refusing to meet his gaze. Tom tried to shake off the uneasy feeling. "She's just curious," he told himself. He started planting the flowers along the fence. The bright colors of the petals seemed to bring life to the yard, and he felt satisfied with each plant he placed carefully in the soil. By mid-morning, he was covered in dirt but smiling. He stood up to stretch and noticed Mrs. Miller walking toward the street, holding a clipboard. Her pace was determined, and Tom immediately felt a small sense of tension. She stopped at the edge of her yard, glaring at him. "Good morning, Tom," she said in a firm tone. "I see you are planting flowers. But did you know there are rules about the types of plants allowed in the neighborhood?" Tom put down his shovel. "Good morning, Mrs. Miller," he said calmly. "I'm not part of the HOA, so I don't have to follow their rules. I just wanted to make my yard pretty for myself and the neighbors." Mrs. Miller's frown deepened. "Not part of the HOA? That's unacceptable. People here expect everything to match. You can't just do whatever you like." She tapped her clipboard as if the rules were written there, even though they did not apply to him. Tom tried to be patient. "I understand your concern. I promise to keep the yard neat and the neighborhood pleasant. I really want to be a good neighbor. Mrs. Miller pursed her lips, muttering something. Then, without warning, she pointed to his newly planted flowers. You should know that bright colors like those are distracting. You need to plant neutral colors, or I will have to complain. Tom blinked. I'm sorry, but I think my flowers will stay. They make me happy, and they are well kept. I hope that's okay. Mrs. Miller shook her head slowly. This is just the beginning, she said. She turned and walked back to her house, clearly thinking about her next move. Tom sighed and went back to his work, trying to focus on the joy of gardening. By afternoon, the yard was starting to look beautiful. The flowers were planted in neat rows, and the vegetable patch was ready for seeds. Tom felt proud. He even set up a small bench under a tree where he could sit and enjoy the garden after work. Just as he was about to take a short break, he noticed Mrs. Miller again. This time she had a small notebook and was writing something quickly. Tom wondered what she could possibly be noting. He smiled at the idea of her taking time to watch him so closely. She must have nothing else to do, he thought with a small laugh. Later, a few neighbors walked by and waved at Tom. They seemed friendly and supportive, smiling at the garden he was creating. It reminded him that not everyone in the neighborhood was like Mrs. Miller. Some people just wanted to be kind and welcoming. As evening approached, Tom finally stepped back to admire his work. The yard looked cheerful and lively. The flowers swayed gently in the breeze, and the small vegetable patch promised fresh vegetables in the weeks to come. He felt satisfied with the day's work. From across the street, Mrs. Miller continued to peek through her blinds, muttering under her breath. She could not understand why anyone would be allowed to do something different. But Tom didn't let her mood spoil his day. He felt happy and hopeful. That night, as the sun set and painted the sky with soft orange and pink colors, Tom sat on the bench in his yard. He held a cup of tea and looked around, feeling proud of his progress. Despite Mrs. Miller's strict watch, he had created a space of his own. A place where he could relax, enjoy nature, and be himself. Little did Tom know Mrs. Miller's efforts to control the neighborhood were only beginning. But Tom was determined to stay positive and enjoy his new life, one flower and one peaceful moment at a time. The next morning, Tom woke up to another bright day. He stretched and smiled, thinking about all the small improvements he wanted to make around his new home. After breakfast, he decided to tackle the front yard. He wanted to plant some colorful flowers near the porch and maybe add a small stone path leading to the gate. As he worked, he noticed Mrs. Miller pacing in her yard. She had a notepad in hand and was looking over at him with a frown. Tom waved politely, trying to show that he was friendly. She didn't wave back. Instead, she muttered something under her breath and shook her head. Tom decided it was best to ignore her. He began arranging small stones along the path, lining them carefully to make a neat walkway. The flowers were next. He chose bright yellows, pinks, and reds to add a cheerful touch. Every time he planted a new flower, he felt happier. This was his home, and he wanted it to be a place full of life. While Tom worked, a few neighbors walked by. One of them, Mrs. Lewis, smiled warmly and said, "Your garden looks wonderful, Tom. Welcome to the street." Tom thanked her, feeling relieved that some neighbors were kind and supportive. Across the street, Mrs. Miller was fuming. She could not understand why anyone would plant flowers without her approval. "This neighborhood has standards," she said to herself, "and he is breaking all of them." Suddenly, Mrs. Miller marched over to the sidewalk near Tom's yard. "Tom," she called loudly, "I think you need to know that planting bright colors is not allowed. It distracts from the neighborhood. You must change them immediately." Tom wiped his hands on his pants and looked at her calmly. "Good morning, Mrs. Miller. I understand you feel that way, but my house is not part of the HOA. I want the yard to be cheerful, and I promise it will always be neat and tidy." Mrs. Miller's eyes narrowed. "Neat and tidy is not enough. You must follow our rules. Otherwise, this will cause problems for everyone." She tapped her notepad as if she were preparing a long report. Tom smiled politely. "I understand your concern. I will do my best to be a good neighbor, but I also want to enjoy my own home. I hope we can find a way to be friendly neighbors." Mrs. Miller huffed and walked back to her yard, clearly frustrated. She muttered under her breath about how people today had no respect for traditions or rules. Tom returned to his work, planting the last flowers in the path. He felt proud of how bright and inviting the front yard looked. By afternoon, Tom had finished the flower beds and the stone path. He stood back and admired his work. The yard looked cheerful and welcoming. A few children walking home from school stopped to admire the flowers. "Your garden is so pretty," one of them said. Tom smiled and thanked them. Mrs. Miller, watching from her window, crossed her arms. She could not understand why the children were praising Tom. "This should not be happening," she muttered. "He is ruining everything." Despite Mrs. Miller's disapproval, Tom felt happy. He had worked hard and the results were satisfying. He could sit on his porch and enjoy the view of his garden, feeling proud of his new home. That evening, Tom decided to invite a few neighbors over for a small tea gathering. He wanted to make a good impression and show that he cared about being friendly. He set up chairs in the backyard and prepared some snacks. Mrs. Lewis and 2 other neighbors came by, smiling and chatting. They admired his yard and told him he had done a wonderful job. Mrs. Miller, watching from her window, frowned even deeper. She could not understand why Tom seemed so well-liked, despite not following her imagined rules. She muttered about how she would make sure everyone knew he was different. Tom, however, chose to focus on the positive. He laughed and talked with his neighbors, feeling comfortable in his new home. He realized that not everyone would agree with him, and that was okay. What mattered was that he was creating a space of happiness and friendship. As the sun set, Tom stood on his porch looking at his flowers swaying gently in the evening breeze. Despite Mrs. Miller's tension across the street, he felt content. His house was his home and he was determined to enjoy every moment. The next morning, Tom woke up feeling energetic. He wanted to spend the day improving his backyard even more. He had bought some small lanterns and fairy lights, planning to decorate the trees and create a cozy corner where he could sit in the evenings. The sun was shining and the birds were singing. Everything felt peaceful, except for Mrs. Miller, who was already awake and watching from her window. As Tom carried a box of lights to the backyard, he noticed her standing near the edge of her yard, frowning. She had a notebook in hand, and it seemed like she was writing down every little detail she observed. Tom waved politely, trying to stay friendly. Mrs. Miller didn't wave back. Instead, she muttered something under her breath and shook her head. Tom decided to ignore her and began decorating. He hung the lanterns carefully on the trees, arranging them so that they glowed softly when lit. The fairy lights wound around the branches, creating a warm and welcoming look. He stepped back occasionally to admire his work, feeling proud of how the backyard was taking shape. By late morning, the yard looked beautiful. The sunlight danced on the colorful flowers, and the lanterns added a magical touch even before being turned on. Tom felt happy, imagining how relaxing the evenings would be when he could sit under the lights with a cup of tea. Across the street, Mrs. Miller could not contain her frustration. She paced back and forth, muttering loudly, "This is impossible. Who does he think he is, decorating however he likes? This is not right." She scribbled notes in her notebook, clearly planning her next move. Suddenly, she marched over to the edge of Tom's yard. "Tom," she called in a loud voice, "do you know that hanging lights is not allowed in this neighborhood? It makes the street look unusual." Tom set down his tools and smiled politely. "Good morning, Mrs. Miller. I'm really just trying to make my backyard cozy for myself. The lights are inside my property and I promise they won't bother anyone." Mrs. Miller crossed her arms. "That doesn't matter. This street has rules and standards and I can't let you ignore them." She tapped her notebook as if the rules were written there for everyone to follow. Tom took a deep breath. "I understand you care about the neighborhood. I will make sure everything stays neat, but I would also like to enjoy my backyard. I hope that can be okay." Mrs. Miller huffed and walked back to her yard, muttering about how difficult new neighbors could be. Tom returned to his decorations, not letting her mood affect him. He hung the last of the lanterns and stepped back to admire his work. The backyard now looked like a small magical garden with flowers, trees, and lights all coming together beautifully. In the afternoon, a few neighbors walked by, noticing Tom's hard work. "Your yard looks amazing," one of them said. "It must be wonderful to sit there in the evening." Tom thanked them with a smile, feeling happy that his effort was appreciated. Mrs. Miller watched from her window, her frown growing deeper. She could not understand why everyone seemed to like Tom, despite not following her imagined rules. She muttered to herself about how she would make sure he understood that things on Oak Street were done a certain way. Later, Tom decided to test the lights. As the sun began to set, he plugged them in, and the backyard glowed softly with warm light. The flowers and trees looked even more beautiful in the glow. Tom stepped back, sipping a cup of tea, and felt proud. He had created a place where he could relax, read a book, or simply enjoy the quiet evening. Across the street, Mrs. Miller peeked through her blinds again, muttering about how bright lights should not be allowed. But even her frown could not hide the fact that the yard looked cheerful. Tom smiled to himself. Despite Mrs. Miller's constant watch, he felt happy and confident. He realized that not everyone would agree with his choices, and that was okay. What mattered most was that he was creating a home where he felt comfortable and joyful. As night fell, the street became quiet. Tom sat on his bench under the soft glow of the lights, sipping tea and enjoying the beauty he had built. He knew Mrs. Miller might continue her efforts, but he was determined to focus on the positive and enjoy his new home. The next morning, Tom woke up feeling ready to spend another productive day in his new home. The backyard lights he had installed the night before still glowed softly, even in the morning sunlight. He smiled at the thought of spending another peaceful day improving his house and garden. As he stepped outside, he noticed Mrs. Miller already awake and standing near the edge of her yard. She held a small tape measure and seemed to be inspecting the space between her property and Tom's. She had a determined look, as if she had already planned what to say next. Tom waved politely, trying to stay friendly. She did not wave back. Tom decided it was best to ignore her and started working on the small vegetable patch he had prepared. He planted tomatoes, carrots, and some herbs carefully in neat rows. The soil was soft and rich, and each seed felt like a promise of fresh vegetables in the coming weeks. While he was planting, Mrs. Miller walked up to the sidewalk near his yard. "Tom," she called loudly, "you need to check your fence. It is too tall and it blocks the view of the street. It must be shorter immediately." Tom wiped his hands on a cloth and looked at her calmly. "Good morning, Mrs. Miller. I built the fence exactly according to the local rules. It is within my property, and it does not block anything important. I hope that is okay." Mrs. Miller frowned and tapped her tape measure. "Rules or not, it looks wrong. This street should look consistent, and your fence is ruining that. You need to fix it." Tom took a deep breath and smiled politely. "I understand your concern. I promise to keep everything neat and safe. But the fence is here to protect my garden and give me privacy. I hope you can understand that." Mrs. Miller huffed and muttered under her breath as she walked back to her yard. She seemed frustrated that Tom did not immediately agree with her suggestions. Tom, however, returned to his work without letting her affect his mood. By late morning, he had finished planting all the vegetables. The garden looked colorful and well organized, with green leaves growing from the soil and tiny sprouts already poking through. Tom felt proud. He could already imagine harvesting fresh tomatoes and carrots in the weeks ahead. A few neighbors walked by and smiled at Tom's progress. "Your garden looks wonderful, Tom," said Mrs. Lewis. "It's so neat and healthy. You really have a talent for this." Tom thanked her, feeling happy that his hard work was appreciated. Mrs. Miller, watching from her window, shook her head in disapproval. She could not understand why so many people admired Tom despite his garden not following her imagined standards. She muttered about how she would make sure everyone knew that he was different from the other neighbors. In the afternoon, Tom decided to set up a small bird feeder near the garden. He filled it with seeds and hung it on a tree branch, hoping that birds would come and enjoy it. Within a few minutes, a few sparrows landed on the feeder and started pecking at the seeds. Tom laughed quietly. He loved watching the birds and knew that they would bring life and joy to his garden. Mrs. Miller from across the street frowned as she watched the birds. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. "Birds will make a mess. He should not have done this." She shook her head and went back to her house, clearly plotting her next move. As evening approached, Tom sat on his porch and enjoyed the peaceful view of his backyard. The flowers swayed gently in the breeze. The vegetable patch looked healthy, and the soft glow of his lanterns made everything look magical. He sipped a cup of tea and felt happy that he had created a home that was both beautiful and relaxing. He knew Mrs. Miller might continue her efforts to control everything around him, but he decided to focus on the positive. He had a lovely garden, friendly neighbors, and his own space where he could enjoy life. That was what mattered most. As night fell, the stars appeared in the sky and the lanterns glowed softly in the backyard. Tom smiled to himself. Despite Mrs. Miller's tension across the street, he felt peaceful. He knew that tomorrow would bring more challenges, but he was ready to face them with patience and positivity. The next morning, Tom woke up feeling determined. Over the past week, he had worked hard to settle into his new home, creating a garden, decorating his backyard, and making the house feel comfortable. Despite Mrs. Miller's constant watch, he had remained calm and focused on his own happiness. As he stepped outside, he noticed Mrs. Miller pacing across her yard, holding her notepad and muttering to herself. Her eyes followed every move Tom made. Today, it seemed, she had a new plan. Tom waved politely as usual. Mrs. Miller did not wave back. Instead, she stomped her foot and turned away, clearly upset that he continued to enjoy his home without listening to her complaints. Tom decided it was best to ignore her and focused on setting up a small water fountain in the garden. He carefully placed it near the flower bed so that the gentle sound of flowing water could create a peaceful atmosphere. The fountain sparkled in the sunlight, adding a fresh and lively touch to the backyard. By mid-morning, the fountain was installed, and Tom stepped back to admire his work. The garden now had flowers, vegetables, a bird feeder, lanterns, and the fountain. It looked like a little paradise. A couple of neighbors walked by and smiled at his efforts. "Your yard is really beautiful, Tom," said one of them. "It's amazing how much life you've brought here." Tom thanked them, feeling proud and happy. From across the street, Mrs. Miller peered through her blinds. Her frown had deepened. She could not understand why people were complimenting Tom despite his house not being part of the HOA. She muttered angrily, "This cannot be allowed. I will make sure he knows that he cannot do everything his own way." Later that afternoon, Tom decided to organize a small lemonade stand in his front yard. He wanted to share some drinks with neighbors and make new friends. He set up a small table with cups and a jug of lemonade, smiling at anyone who walked by. Mrs. Miller noticed immediately. She walked to the sidewalk, hands on her hips, and called loudly, "Tom, you cannot sell drinks here without permission. This is not allowed in the neighborhood." Tom smiled calmly. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Miller. This is not for selling. I just wanted to share lemonade with neighbors and make new friends. No money is involved." Mrs. Miller looked surprised, but she did not step back. "It doesn't matter. People should not do things differently. It disrupts the street." Tom nodded politely. "I understand your concern, but this is just a small gesture to be friendly. I hope that is okay with you." Mrs. Miller huffed and muttered something under her breath before returning to her yard. Tom turned to wave at a few neighbors who had stopped by for lemonade. They smiled warmly and thanked him for the kind gesture. Tom felt happy knowing he was making connections and spreading positivity, despite Mrs. Miller's tension across the street. By evening, the backyard was glowing softly in the light of the lanterns. The fountain bubbled gently, birds visited the feeder, and the flowers swayed in the breeze. Tom sat on the bench with a cup of tea, feeling peaceful and content. Mrs. Miller, watching from her window, muttered angrily, "No one listens to me. He is ignoring every rule and making the neighborhood look different." She shook her head and went inside, clearly frustrated that Tom remained calm and happy. Tom smiled to himself. He realized that not everyone would agree with his choices, and that was okay. What mattered most was that he had created a home full of life, beauty, and positivity. Despite Mrs. Miller's constant watch, he had learned to focus on the good things in life. As night fell, the lanterns glowed softly, the fountain sparkled, and the neighborhood was quiet. Tom felt proud of his home and the peaceful environment he had built. He knew Mrs. Miller might continue her efforts, but he was confident that kindness, patience, and a positive attitude could overcome any challenge. Tom took a deep breath, looked around his backyard, and smiled. His house was not just a building, it was a home, a place of peace, happiness, and community. And no matter what, he was ready to enjoy it fully. The next morning, Tom woke up feeling cheerful. Over the past week, he had settled into his new home and created a backyard full of flowers, vegetables, and soft glowing lights. He had also made small gestures to connect with his neighbors, like sharing lemonade and welcoming people into his yard. Despite Mrs. Miller's constant watch, He had stayed calm and positive, focusing on the happiness he had built around him. As Tom stepped outside, he noticed Mrs. Miller pacing near her window again, muttering to herself. She seemed determined to find something wrong. Tom waved politely as usual. She did not wave back. Instead, she muttered and went inside, clearly frustrated. Tom smiled to himself. He had learned that no matter how tense she became, he could choose to stay peaceful and kind. Tom decided to spend the morning planting more flowers along the side of the house. He chose soft pinks and purples this time, thinking they would blend beautifully with the existing garden. As he planted, he could hear birds chirping and a soft breeze rustling the leaves. The garden was alive and vibrant, and every flower seemed to bring a little more joy into his life. Later in the day, Tom saw a few neighbors walking by. Mrs. Lewis waved at him with a smile. "Your garden is really something, Tom," she said. "It makes the street look so lively and welcoming." Tom thanked her politely. He realized that while Mrs. Miller was negative, most neighbors appreciated his efforts and kindness. Across the street, Mrs. Miller peeked through her blinds. Her frown had not changed, but something seemed different today. Perhaps she realized that her efforts to control Tom's actions were not having the effect she wanted. Tom noticed her glance, but he focused on the flowers and the soft sunlight warming the garden. In the afternoon, Tom decided to set up a small outdoor seating area under the trees. He placed a few chairs and a small table near the fountain. He even added a colorful umbrella to provide shade and make the spot more inviting. His idea was to create a place where neighbors could relax and enjoy the garden. Soon, a few neighbors stopped by. They admired the seating area and commented on how peaceful and beautiful the backyard had become. Tom offered them lemonade, and everyone laughed and shared stories. Even the children who had been walking home from school the past week stopped to admire the garden. Tom felt happy and proud, knowing that his efforts were making people smile. Mrs. Miller, from her window, watched the activity. She frowned at first, but slowly her expression softened. She muttered under her breath, realizing that no matter how much she tried to interfere, Tom had created a space of beauty and kindness that could not be spoiled. By evening, Tom turned on the lanterns in the fountain. The backyard glowed softly in the warm light. The birds had flown to their nests, and a gentle breeze made the flowers sway. Tom stepped back, sipping his tea, and looked around at everything he had built. His house felt complete. It was a home filled with life, happiness, and peace. Mrs. Miller finally stepped outside and walked to the edge of her yard. She looked at Tom's garden and the peaceful scene around him. For the first time, she smiled. Not a big smile, but a small one. She realized that Tom was not causing harm or chaos. He had simply chosen to live his life with positivity and care. Tom noticed her glance and waved kindly. "Good evening, Mrs. Miller," he said. "I hope you're having a good day." Mrs. Miller hesitated, then nodded. "Good evening, Tom," she replied softly. She did not say more, but Tom felt a sense of relief. Even if she never fully agreed with him, she seemed to accept that his home was a happy place and that his actions were not harmful. As night fell, the lanterns glowed, the fountain bubbled softly, and the stars appeared above. Tom sat on the bench with a warm cup of tea, feeling proud of what he had accomplished. He realized that patience, kindness, and positivity could overcome tension and create happiness, even in difficult situations. His house was no longer just a place to live, it was a home full of life, peace, and friendship. And despite the challenges, Tom knew he had made the right choice. Oak Street was now a place where he could enjoy each day fully, surrounded by beauty, laughter, and the calm he had always dreamed of.